Dobre, vážené dámy, vážení páni, máme dnes tú česť privítať na našej akademickej pôde veľvyslanca mimoriadneho splnomocneného Švajčiarskej konfederácie, pána Christiana Fotša. Ako iste viete, Švajčiarsko je špecifickou krajinou v mnohých oblastiach a niektorými z týmito špecifikami sa dnes oboznámime vďaka človeku najkompetentnejšiemu na našom území. A preto mi dovolte ešte raz poďakovať sa pánovi veľvyslancovi, že meral dnes cestu do Trnavy a privítať ho na našej akademickej pôde. Všeobecne ten priebeh diskusie bude asi taký, že pán veľvyslanec povie niekoľko základných informácií ohľadom problematiky, ktorá je predmetom našej dnešnej prednášky a následnej diskusie. A potom robíme niečo ako moderovaný rozhovor. Pri tej príležitosti by som rád privítal moju kolegyňu Karin Rogalsku, ktorá je pôvodom z Nemecka, študuje vo Švajčiarsku, ak teda ešte stále to platí. Áno. Ale je to taký svetobežník, ako vidíte, plynul hovorí po slovensky, takže už niekoľko rokov žije aj na Slovensku a je našou cťou ju opäť privítať na našej akademickej pôde, pretože toto nie je prvé stretnutie a dúfam, že nie ani posledné tu s ňou na našej univerzite. Takže vítam aj pani Karin Rogalsku. No a mňa pravdepodobne poznáte, ja som Martin Klus a prednášam okrem iného na tejto fakulte. Takže nebudem zdržiavať, nechám hneď priestor excelencii a samozrejme bude tu veľký priestor neskôr pre vás. Budeme hovoriť v angličtine. Ak by ste mali otázky v slovenčine, pokojne ich položte v slovenskom jazyku, pokúsime sa to pretlmočiť. Ak by bolo najlepšie možno aj priamo v angličtine, dokonca v nemčine, tak sa tomu budeme ešte viacej tešiť. Takže nech sa páči.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure for me as ambassador of Switzerland to accept this invitation to your university. As I mentioned already this morning when I met the rector, I think this exchange between universities, between different countries, between embassy and students is extremely important. Want to learn from each other, to get new ideas, to refresh our thinking, and actually also to learn the point of view from another country. Before I present very shortly Switzerland to you, I would like to make some promotion for Swiss tourism. I brought here some nice brochures about biking in Switzerland, about lakes, water, gourmet traveling. So please feel free to take one of the brochures after the lecture. Maybe you get also some inspiration from that and not only from our discussion. Switzerland is a country which is comparable to Slovakia in size. It's a little bit smaller, but it has a little bit more population, 8 million people. So the two countries are really very comparable in their geographical and demographic position. Both countries have 5 neighbors. You know the 5 neighbors of Slovakia. The neighbor countries of Switzerland are France, Germany, Italy, Austria and Liechtenstein. So with this very tiny country we have 5 neighbors as well. A very brief word about the history of Switzerland. We will talk about direct democracy and the justice system. So it is good for you to have this historical element. The first constitution in Switzerland dates from 1848. 1848, so in this 19th century where so many turmoils happened in Europe, the first Swiss constitution was built as well. We have basically still the same constitution. There were some partial revisions, but in the substance the constitution is still the same. During the discussion we will talk about this continuity and the change. So where do we need adoption of the structure, of the political structure of a country, and where can we continue with the same legal and historical framework. Maybe we will emphasize also the differences between Switzerland and Slovakia. if you look back at the last 150, 160 years of history of Slovakia, or let's say the territory which is today Slovakia, or the Slovak people, you will see a big difference. Switzerland has the same constitution, I mentioned it, the same territory, and what we call today Slovakia, there was a big change since 1850. So we will talk also about a little bit about this. I think we start now with the discussion together with Karin. She will ask me some questions and I reply to it. And in the second half of our event, then I will be most happy to answer to your questions.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, I hope we will manage to cover three main issues in our talk. It should be about direct democracy, civic culture, and judiciary reforms. I would like to ask to start with a question on direct democracy. Could you explain to us more the historic dimension of it, the historic roots of it, and how do you realize direct democracy in your federal system? Because the political system of Switzerland is quite complicated, at least for foreigners.
Thank you very much for this question. I have mentioned already very briefly the historic dimension, so I put it now in a relation to the direct democracy. When you read the Slovak newspapers in the last, let's say, few months, we all read about the guerrilla movement or the guerrilla activities, guerrilla files. And among these people promoting guerrilla movement, there was also the call for direct democracy, more direct participation. These protests quite quickly disappeared. So why there is no yet direct democracy in Slovakia? I think, as Karin mentioned, the historical dimension is very important. In Switzerland, the core of the state, even the understanding of the state, comes from small unities. Switzerland didn't exist immediately in the borders of 1848 when the first constitution was established, but it grew up from small unities in the valleys, in the countryside, in the small towns. So the direct democracy, the participation of the people in the very small organization was the beginning of this idea of direct participation of the citizens, the direct participation of the people. It started in the farming area. Switzerland is a very farming, well, not anymore, but it used to be a very farming-oriented country. And the idea of democracy came historically that the farmers put their forces, their energy together and said, we have to solve the problem ourselves. Then comes the mythical origin of Switzerland, which dates back to the 13th century, actually 1291. It was the decision a sort of uprising of farmers in the today heart of Switzerland, and they said, we kick the foreign judges out. We kicked the foreign rulers which ruled Swiss territory at that time, we kicked them out of the country. And it used to be the Habsburgs, which then later made career in Vienna, as you know. So this is also the heart of the direct democracy that Swiss always opposed to be ruled by others. They wanted to shape their political destiny, their physical destiny, their economic destiny themselves. And out of this grew this idea that the participation and decision should come directly by the people. This was later transformed in the political system. I think we talk later about this. We will talk about that concretely. What does it mean, direct democracy? So how is the direct democracy ruled or organized today? To come back to your second question, the federalistic idea of the Swiss state, of Switzerland. You have two big models of organizing a country. One is a centralized mode, like France is a typical example. The decisions are taken in Paris, You have one system for the school in France, everywhere, the exams, the same question, all the students have the same question. Or you have a more bottom-up approach, a federalistic approach, where the competence for different areas lies with the small units, the communities, the cantons, the areas, and Switzerland is a typical part of this, a typical example of this second model organizing a country. So it is bottom-up, the small unit has the power to decide, and this has the link now with direct democracy, what I mentioned in the beginning. The small unit want to decide, and only the competence which has to be given to a higher level is given to a higher level. This is also the Swiss constitution today. To end this part, welcome. Please. This is also the Swiss constitution nowadays. Basically, the cantons, which are the areas, are competent to organize schooling, education, traffic, health system, and only a competence which is in the constitution given to the federal level. For this, Switzerland as such is competent, and for all other areas it is the canton.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for learning a little bit about the structures of and how far direct democracy can be organized. I would like to ask you about some crucial terms of direct democracy. One is common sense, and I learned by your predecessor, Josef Aiger, that politisieren is very important in Switzerland, so that people meet and talk about politics. Could you explain this to us?
I think one very important part of direct democracy is the participation of the people, the participation of the voters, the participation of those who can give their vote in an election, or who can give their vote in a referendum, where it is not about election but about concrete questions. And this political, let's say, opinion, political will has to be created. It doesn't come from nothing. I think, first of all, it is the sense of responsibility, political responsibility. Direct democracy has as a result that people feel responsible for the results. They do not complain only about the government sitting in the capital. They feel themselves responsible about what is happening, or the ball is played back to them, and they say, well, you cannot complain only about the government, but with direct democracy yourself are responsible for the results. And this leads to what you mentioned, politisieren. So there are discussions on the communal level, on the cantonal level, about political questions. It's what we call the Stammtisch. So traditionally, there was one table in the restaurant where the men traditionally went to drink the beer in the evening. One table was reserved as a Stammtisch, and there people sit together and discussed about concrete political questions, about politicians, about the decisions having been taken. Now, with our days where the women participate also in the political landscape, actually, this is maybe one part, if I can mention this here, of direct democracy, that sometimes the process is very slow. So we are always proud as Swiss to talk about direct democracy and participation of everybody and the right of the people. But the other side of the medal is that the women got the right to vote very late, actually 1971. So it is just more than 40 years that women are allowed to vote. So I think this system of direct participation and of feeling responsible has also an effect to slow down the whole process and to slow down decisions, because we have to gain a majority. So to come back to your question, I think this feeling of responsibility of political decisions, the feeling of participation, of activation, is one point why I would say that the Swiss political system is very strong. People do not care about, let's say, people do not ignore the political process, but they get the feeling of participation, of active participation, and they do this politisieren, how we call it in German, so they talk and they follow the results after an election or after a referendum.
I would like to deepen this issue a little bit. Who is a driver of direct democracy in Switzerland? For example, I come from Germany, and the driver of democracy, I'd say, is other parties, because they have a constitutional, there's a passage in the constitution that parties are responsible for creating and developing democracy. How is it in Switzerland? Is it the parties to be most responsible for developing direct democracy? Is it NGOs, or who is it? About the multiplicators.
Well, I don't know exactly now. The system is much more diverse than in Germany, what you mentioned, or also what we see in Slovakia, where the parties are the main driving forces of the political process. In Switzerland, you have many more entities which drive the political process than just the political parties. And I was reluctant or not sure to say, is this a result of the direct democracy, or is it the condition of the direct democracy? I think it's both. It's a process where one influences the other. Well, of course, there are also political parties in Switzerland. 7 of them are represented in our parliament. But you have many more of driving political forces. The NGO sector, the civil sector is extremely strong. So people who do not feel comfortable in a political party, or people who cannot identify with a political party, they find their home in one of the NGOs. Then with the federal structure of Switzerland, the communities are very strong, so the communities have also a consensus building factor. You have the cantons with the federal system. The cantons have something to say inside their own jurisdiction, but also on a federal level. You have think tanks which participate actively in the political process. You have unions, the whole social structure. Unions are very strong. Employers and employee association. Maybe this is one typical example in Switzerland that the landscape is extremely diverse. So you cannot focus on the political parties, you cannot focus on the federal structure, but it is a network of different entities, of different political organizations which shape or which promote the political future. This makes on one hand the system very hard to understand. If you come from outside, I would say it takes years and years and years. And even me, being born in Switzerland, it took a very long time, not only studies but also practical experience, to have an insight in the system. And I would say even today I do not fully understand all the structure, how it is organized. The effect of this extreme power sharing and extreme influence of different entities in the process is that the process is very slow. I'm always surprised here in Slovakia. You say, well, the parliament has a new law suggestion, and after 3 months it is decided. The new law is there, if it finds a majority in the parliament. But if you get this majority, as a Smear party now has, the law goes in 2-3 months, you have a new legal basis. In Switzerland this is unimaginable. There is what we call Vernehmlassung. So one ministry is suggesting a new law, let's say about immigration or whatever. Then it goes in this extremely complicated process of Vernehmlassung to the political parties, to the cantons, to these NGOs, to the unions, to dozens of entities. All of them are listened, so they can make their comments and suggestions to a new law. It goes back to the ministry, then it goes to the parliament. In parliament is discussion again. Then, we talk later about this, 50,000 people can collect signatures. If they can collect 50,000 signatures, there is a referendum. So to enter into force for a new law, in an extreme case, it can take 2 to 3 years. And here in Slovakia, the parliament decides in 2 months you have a new law. So this process of delaying the decision, it can be good because you can avoid mistakes. Sometimes if you decide very quickly, or if the parliament decides very quickly, you make mistakes. On the other hand, it makes the political landscape also very stable and very slow. I mentioned the right for women to vote. I think this was one reason why Switzerland denied to women this basic political right so long, that you always need to get a majority. And well, the important decisions can be delayed very much by that.
Yeah, you talked about a large diversity of elements of multiple contributing to direct democracy. Nevertheless, there's all these elements, all these subjects, I have the impression, are striving for consensus, and that's why it takes so long. And you have a fascinating element in the constitution, it's called magic formula. So could you explain it to us, what it means for the parties? Zauberformel.
Yeah, so probably I gave you quite a complicated picture so far of Switzerland, and well, it is complicated. That's why I give you a complicated picture. And I think Karin's question goes in the direction why Switzerland still works with such a complicated approach, with such complicated structures, with such complicated processes. And a key element is this consent. So we always want to gain a majority, not only in the legislation process, but in any question which needs to be decided. And this extremely wide process of consultation, of getting everybody on board, of finding a common solution, it's coming from this consensus idea, from the approach to gain consensus in questions. Let me talk a little bit about the structure of Switzerland. Switzerland is a very diverse country. It's a huge diversity in languages. We 20% speak French, 70% speak as mother language German, 10% speak Italian. Not to talk of all the immigrants. We have 22% of the Swiss permanent population. They are non-Swiss. So some of them do not speak German, nor French, nor Italian. So Switzerland is a very diverse country, culturally, geographically, historically as well, demographically, socially. And to get the consent of as many people as possible helps to bridge this diversity in Switzerland, helps to get everybody on board, helps to gain majority. And this is a key factor in Switzerland. We always try in any process, any question, to gain a majority. We spoke about the political process, but also in other questions, if we gain a majority. And this is interesting, we have a referendum, and even if the decision is, let's say, 50.5% say yes and 49.5% say no, the question is decided. And the 49.5% who lose, they accept the decision even of a minor majority.
Sorry, may I ask you one question? But is it possible to bring up the issue once again by formulating the question a little bit different? Or is it really decided?
Well, of course you can bring up any question again, but well, the point is, do you get in this case then a different majority? I would like to take two concrete examples. As you know, Switzerland is not a member of the European Union. In 1992, 1991, 1992, there were negotiations between Switzerland and the then Europäische Gemeinschaft about European Economic Area, which is like a framework agreement between non-member countries and the European Union, solving different institutional questions. Today, Norway is the biggest country which is part of the EEA. In 1992, our government wanted that Switzerland becomes member of the European Economic Area. 50,000 signatures were collected. There was a referendum about this question, and 49.8% said yes, and 50.2% of the population said no. And this question was decided, and now it's politically dead. It's now 20 years ago exactly, December 1992, but sometimes you hear the suggestion, well, we could vote again about the EEA. The European Union would agree to talk again about this question, but it is politically dead, so it's not possible to come back. To take another example with what I mentioned already, is the right of women to vote. This was actually brought since the beginning of the 19th century. The first time was in the 1920s. It was brought 3 times to a referendum, and 2 times there was a no of the men, of course, because they were the only one who were entitled to vote. So the men said, no, women, you stay at home, you go to the church, and then you cook, and you take care about the children. You do not, you can talk to your husband if you want to participate in the political process, but you don't go to vote. And 1971, that was a yes. So it depends very much of the question, if you can bring up a topic again, or if a decision is politically dead once you get a no.
And who does profit from direct democracy? Because you told me in advance that 22% of the population of Switzerland are foreigners, and 25% or 1/4 of the population is under 18. So a lot of people at first glance should not profit from direct democracy, or am I wrong?
Well, I'm the Swiss ambassador, so I should promote Switzerland a little bit here. I'm paid by the Swiss taxpayers. But this is actually a point where I'm also quite critical with the idea of direct democracy, or of any system with people participation. If you think about 8 million Swiss, I said the living population is about 8 million. 22% are foreigners, non-Swiss citizens, they are not entitled to vote. Then, so you have roughly 80% left. Of this, you have people under 18, they are not allowed to vote. Let's say another 15% under 18, so we are down to 65% of the living population which is allowed to vote. Of this, maybe the participation is 35%, which can happen, that not everybody entitled to vote goes really to the box, to the poll box. So 1/3 of 65-66% is 22% of overall people participate, and of this a tiny majority decides with a yes. So you get maybe 11% of the population can decide of the question concerning the whole country. So I would say this is a critical point in an election system and in a direct democracy system, that you have finally a minority of 1/10 of the population which decides for the whole. This is a point coming up sometime. Of course, you can invite the people to vote. Some cantons it is compulsory, you have to go. and if you don't go to vote or elect, you have to pay a fine. It's a symbolic fine, like €4 or €5 if you don't go. But still, it is you know, in the social context, it is important you go to vote. Or you can try to increase the participation in the direct democratic process by doing less votes. Now we go 4 times per year. The people entitled to go to vote, they go to the poll box 4 times per year, every 3 months, which is also giving a certain fatigue or a certain tiredness. Or, well, you could change the system, and this is politically the most sensitive point. You can change the system to giving the right to vote also to foreigners, not on the federal level, but on the commune level. We can give our opinion if a new bridge is going to be built, if a park should have trees or only grass. So why not let foreigners decide about these very basic questions on the communal level, where they are directly concerned, living there. So in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, it's a little bit more progressive. So some communities, they give the right to participate to foreigners, non-Swiss. Other communities are less open for the participation in the political process of foreigners. But actually, politically, this is the most sensitive issue. To what point can non-citizen participate in the political process?
Okay. Let's move to the main issue of civic culture now. But I think there's an interesting link between direct democracy and political culture. I often hear that this system of direct democracy makes people automatically think more about politics. Would you agree?
I totally agree, yes. It's what I mentioned in the very beginning. It's the sense of politisieren, of feeling responsible for the process, of feeling responsible, of shaping your environment. I think this is stimulating the people to participate in the process. The possibility to have your say. It's maybe like in your family, if your parents or your colleagues in your social group listen to what you say, then you have also the sense of responsibility, because you can participate in important questions. And if your social group doesn't listen to your opinion, then you say, okay, I do not participate, I don't feel responsible. And this is exactly the same in the political process. So by this possibility of participation, the civic culture is shaped in a way that there is a higher sense of responsibility and a higher participation.
And what kind of impact does that have on the political landscape of Switzerland? For example, here you often say, well, there are politicians on the one hand and the citizens on the other hand, and they actually don't care about each other. No. You say the same in Germany, so it's an all over Europe problem. How is this in Switzerland? Are there certain elites who are not reachable for the others, or not?
One effect is a high diversity. We spoke in the very beginning of our talk about this extremely complicated structure of political parties, of NGOs, of any kind of interest group. So this direct participation has, as a result, this diversity. You have not a monolithic party or monolithic structure, but you have a very diverse, complicated structure of participation. And the second effect is what you mentioned. I would say there is no political elite. Sometimes you can read in newspapers or hear in discussions that they say, well, jetzt Bern oben. So Bern is the capital, and blaming the responsible politicians in the capital. But this is pure polemic. Because with the system of direct democracy, each politician can lose a referendum. Each question decided by the parliamentarian, decided by the government, can be brought to referendum, can be brought to a decision by the people, and this automatically cuts the influence of the politicians. It brings the politician closer to the people. It makes them more tangible, more concrete as figures. So, of course, you have always, in all the countries, in all the structures, you might have a tendency about those deciding and those followers or being decided upon. But with this corrective, the highest sovereign is the people, is the direct participation of people in the process. So this elite thinking is very limited in Switzerland.
So we heard that people seem to be more active, citizens seem to be more active in the political sphere and elsewhere in Switzerland. Does it mean that there are less so-called political or professional politicians? Because, for example, here we have some names, they appear over years, like Mr. Zurindo or Fico, and maybe from Switzerland I would name Blocher, okay, but I know he does a lot of other things.
It's a question we actually discuss very intensely. I have to be careful what I say, because my boss, he is a professional politician. The actual Minister of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland, Didier Burkhalter, he made all his career in political bodies.
But he's an exception then?
He's an exception. He was in the Gemeinderat and then cantonal, and he never had a job or he never made his money in the private sector. But this is an exception. There is another example why we discuss this question very intensely. So basically we have the militia system. There are no professional politicians. But now one member of our parliament, a very famous member, Mr. Spuler, he is also a businessman. He owns the biggest rail or train producer in Switzerland. His company is constructing trains and the tramways. And he has also companies in Poland, production, in Hungary. He built the Tatra railway or tram here in Slovakia. And he stepped down 2 days ago from the parliament, saying the challenges of his company are now so big, with the strong Swiss franc, with the slowing economy in Europe. So he wants to sacrifice all his energy for his company, which shows the limits of the militia parliamentarian system in Switzerland, that he says parliament activity is too time-consuming. I cannot do both jobs anymore. But to answer to your question, basically we don't have professional politicians. Basically, this idea of militia. So you are active in the private sector, you are active in your family, and additionally you have some responsibility in the political system, is very deeply rooted in Switzerland. And this helps also the question we discussed before, is there an elite or not? I think this helps to reduce the gap between politicians and population. So everyone is a citizen, every politician is also a citizen. Every politician, almost every politician, is also a businessman. Every politician is also in a family.
You've already given us some excellent general ideas on direct democracy, on civic culture. I'd like to talk with you now about judiciary reforms, because Switzerland is very active in supporting Slovakia to reform the system of the judicial system. And I would like to ask you, or I'd like to ask you to tell us a little bit about this cooperation.
Well, I'm strongly convinced that the trust in the judiciary system, the reliability and the trust of the people in the judiciary system is a key factor to make country work, is a key factor for a good and a strong economy, and is a key factor of the trust of the people in the system overall. Well, as you could read in the newspaper, Slovakia lost again some points in the rating of I think it's Transparency International who is publishing the figures. And this is always the question. It's very hard to make an assessment of a judicial system because you have no hard factors. So usually you ask the question to the public, what is your opinion about a system? And the opinion of the Slovak public about their own judicial system, the judicial system in Slovakia is very bad. You do not trust your own judges. You think they are not transparent, or you think they are corrupt, or you think that the decisions take too long. So the judicial system, and it's not me as ambassador who is saying that, it's the Slovak, it's you, the Slovak citizen who makes this judgment. But I hear it also from investors, not only from Swiss investors, but from American investors, from British investors, from German investors, to attract investment, which actually leads also to more jobs. You need a trustworthy, reliable judicial system. Now, having recognized this, we have a program, Swiss government and the Slovak government, about reinforcing the Slovak judicial system, at least partially. One part of reform of the Slovak judicial system is political. This is up to you and to the Slovak politicians. We can do nothing as a foreign country, but there is also a practical side of the judicial system, and there we have a very interesting program between the two countries. It's about e-justice. So it's about to register in electronically court files, to follow them up, so you have the right documents, or a judge has the right documents at hand at the right time, and finally also publish decisions by the courts on the internet or wherever, because one key factor of every judicial system is the transparency. The hearings should be public, so the people can go to listen or to hear how the judges find their decisions. Court rulings should be court rulings should be argued, so a judge should give the reason why he takes a certain decision, and not just say this party is right and this party is wrong. And court rulings should be published, after all. They should be accessible for future generations of judges, so they can refer to the previous decisions of the court or of the High Court. And this Swiss project, together with the Slovak Ministry of Justice, goes in the direction of establishing the hardware, the software, and the know-how to get registered, all the court rulings, to follow them through the process electronically, so no papers should be lost anymore, or no files should disappear, and finally to publish them also on the internet. This project is not only about money. Of course, Switzerland is carrying a good substantial part of the finances involved, but it's also about sharing know-how. So our High Court and our cantonal courts, the experts are cooperating with the Ministry of Justice in Slovakia and giving the know-how how these questions are solved in Switzerland. Because the Swiss judicial system, the Czech judicial system, the German, they have the same challenges as the Slovak judicial system. One system is not isolated, but when cases come up, the pressure for transparency and for reliability is there. So the project is how can countries learn from each other to develop the know-how to face these challenges I mentioned before.
Have you realized any changes since the government changed on March 10th? So I don't mean it too much politically, but I mean whether they have different interests. because judicial reforms were a very important part of the Metoda program. What is it now, and what do your partners ask now for?
The program has been signed before the change of the government, so this is still continuing. I read, so from this project there is no change between the governments. What I read in the newspaper, well, we talk, or Slovaks talk much less about judicial reforms. This topic is a little bit, well, not promoted anymore so actively as it used to be in the previous government. But I think this 6 months or 5 months is too short to say if there is really a change with the government in this kind of questions, or if this is just the time they need to know the new questions.
I come to my last question, and I would like to ask you, what do you think? What are the general factors that judicial reforms can be successful?
It's certainly transparency. This will promote the trust of the people in the judicial system. Transparency, participation, again, you know, it's like in the political process, participation in the process. In Switzerland, and this leads us to the direct democracy as well, the judges of the lower court, they are elected by the people. So we have also, I think it's similar to Slovakia, 3 levels in the judicial system, and the people of the lowest court, they are elected by the people. The judges of the highest court are elected by the parliament. So I think this is also a key factor to make the judicial system successful. People have to gain the trust in the system by electing the judges. The judge is one of their own. It's not an elite, as we spoke about it before in the political discussion. Transparency, I mentioned already. Then the time factor is extremely important. If a court ruling takes years and years and years, and the questions have already been solved by other means, or real estate is blocked, or the whole business process is blocked by court rulings which take too long. So time factor is the third element I would like to mention, saying this is really enhancing the trust in the system, which is important for everyone. It's important, as I told before, for foreign investors, it's important for the people, and it's important for the country as a whole.
So thank you very much indeed for this first part. I would like to change my place now with Mr. Klus, and I give the floor to him and open the room for your questions.
Thank you, Excellency. It was very interesting. I found myself a couple of questions, but first I should give the floor to the friends here. So we have a first one already.
First of all, welcome to our school. I would like to ask you, you mentioned
Please,
the judiciary system and courts, and I would like to ask you just about the Swiss people, how they are satisfied with the justice system in Switzerland, and if there are some results or maybe research, how they are satisfied, and maybe how fast are working courts in Switzerland, and if they are, of course, I think they are faster, but if it's the difference, if it's big or small. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. The first part, I cannot give you a precise figure, because this Transparency International survey, I'm sure Switzerland figures also in the results, but I do not remember what the results were of this Transparency International survey. I cannot give you a precise figure, but I can tell you in general what are the dissatisfaction with the judicial system and what are the satisfaction. So the system is considered to be very transparent. People really get decisions well, with a good argument, with clear explanations. They get them published also. The process is clear and transparent. The critics goes to the second questions you asked is about time. So the system is too slow. And this has to do with the overload of the courts. Many courts are overloaded, are too busy. And it has to do with the many Rechtsmittel. So legal processes you can, or legal steps you can take when you want a final decision. I give you one concrete example. Well, this has to do with the very developed rule of law in Switzerland. A big issue now is migration, because we have a lot of asylum seekers in Switzerland. And, well, you just can come to Switzerland, you say, I apply for asylum, even if you come from a safe country. Let's say somewhere in the Balkans, you come from Croatia, which is a member of European Union soon, which is a totally safe country, but you can come to Switzerland, you say, I apply for asylum. And if you use all the legal means you have, it can take up to 4 years to get the final decision. And for these 4 years you can stay in Switzerland, your children go to school, and after 4 years is the final decision that your asylum is refused. And then, of course, you say, now I'm already integrated here, so I do not want to go back anymore. I take this example because it's now a very political issue in Switzerland, but it's also valid for other decisions, that the process takes too long. This is one of the main critic points which is actually being discussed in Switzerland. Did I answer to your question?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
However, we can say it's still better if it takes too long, but it's a proper decision, than if it takes 2-3 days, as in Slovakia in some cases. But sometimes we are very much hesitating if it was correct decision of the judges. Thank you. Some more questions, please. Yes, please.
In our country, in the last period, the democracy was mentioned mainly as some treatment of corruption. Can you tell us something more about corruption in Switzerland, particularly maybe even your career? Did you make corruption?
I think corruption has a cultural context, and it has a structural context, to say so. Now, culturally, by tradition, Switzerland is very little corrupt. You cannot bribe a policeman. It simply doesn't work. It's not in the tradition. You cannot bribe a judge. I don't know why. Well, it's historically, we spoke a little bit about the historical dimension. It has certainly to do that public officials have a good salary. Or let's say the health system is a good example. You know, I would never have in Switzerland the idea even to bring a present to my doctor, to bring him a bottle of wine or a bottle of schnapps or flowers. If I go to consult a doctor in his private clinic or in a hospital, it doesn't come to my mind. And in Slovakia it's different, you know, as I read in the newspaper and as I hear, you give little presents, and this is not corruption, but maybe it's the beginning, you know, to give little presents, or you need the favor of your doctor that he treats you correctly, or that he doesn't keep you waiting for 8 hours or whatever. And this is really no issue in Switzerland. And one element of explanation, all these are very complex processes which have a lot of explanations, but one element is also the salary. That doctors have a very high salary in Switzerland. I just read a survey, and the average salary of a doctor in Switzerland, well, don't be shocked, is 200,000 Swiss francs per year. This is 160,000 euro per year, 170,000 euro per year. So it's a very, even for Swiss standards, where all the salaries but also the costs are high, this is a very high salary. So doctors are among the best paid workers or employees or independent workers. So in a way they wouldn't give you any special favor for a bottle of wine or for a box of chocolate. So I think this is one element why the historical or the conceptual corruption is very low in Switzerland. Now, I also would like to make a critical comment because we all like to have little favors, we all like to get a special present. One main point of critics in the Swiss system, also by Transparency International, is that financing of parties is not transparent. So there is no obligation if you as a company, if you as a private person give money to a political party, neither the party nor the person have to declare this openly. So it is not clear which party gets how much money from where. And I, as a Swiss citizen, I have to criticize this because some party, we have one very populist, the right-wing party, it's called the Schweizerische Volkspartei, Swiss People's Party. They have a lot of money. The richest man, or one of the richest men in Switzerland, Mr. Blocher, he's behind this party. His lifestyle is not as eccentric like Mr. Berlusconi's lifestyle was or is, but it's maybe a little bit the same mix of private, successful entrepreneur and political system, and he is financing this party like other people, and we do not know how much money he gives to the party. And this I have to criticize in the Swiss system. This is some kind, it's not corruption, but it's intransparency. And of course a political party can influence, if they have a lot of money, the public opinion. So this is some kind of intransparency or indirect corruption I have to criticize.
And so we don't see some direct relation between the direct democracy and corruption.
That's a tough question, isn't it?
That's a tough question, yeah, that's a tough question. I think direct democracy makes corruption more difficult because always the majority of the people, every law, you can ask for a referendum, you can collect 50,000 signatures, and then it has to be brought to referendum to the people. And you cannot bribe the majority, you know. You would have to spend too much money, and it would be too transparent if you pay everybody. So I have never been thinking on this link of the question between corruption and direct democracy, but thinking about it now, I would say it has a limiting influence to corruption because the majority can always cut the power of the political elite or whoever is in a position to take decisions.
Okay, I guess this was a very nice answer, and you picked up a very interesting topic about financing of the parties. I don't want to say that it's much more transparent in Slovakia. At least we know from which source they have the money. Although I guess we don't know much more about which source they have really this money. But please feel free to give some other questions.
Please.
Yeah, Mr. Ambassador, I spent almost the whole month of July in Switzerland. I was in Freiburg Canton, dealing with people who were from French and German-speaking part, and we made a project of teaching them languages. French-speaking Swiss do not speak German, and vice versa. So if you want to make business in Zurich between two parts, you have to speak English sometimes. And people were telling me, basically, the Swiss people are not very much interested in politics, because they say they care about what's happening on the local levels. That means in their villages, towns, cantons. So even if a referendum passes, it's only about 30–40% of all the voters who decide what will happen. I have been following closely, for example, referendum about smoking and non-smoking in the places out of restaurants or public places. And Swiss people decided that it's allowed to smoke. That means this is direct democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Even smokers have their rights to smoke. My question is, how do you want to increase on your level or the highest level, interest of people in politics in Switzerland? You know, the power of president is not so big in Switzerland as here, because you have a rotating system. Every 6 months, different member of the council. Some people in Switzerland don't even know who is the president now. So this is the very important question: how to increase the interest of Swiss people in politics?
Nice question.
Well, thank you very much. You mentioned actually two elements. One is participation, what we have been discussing also with Karin a little bit about it. And one is this language question, as you spent your time in canton of Freiburg. This is, I would like to say something on these languages. We speak always about the German speaking, French speaking, and Italian speaking. But how does it happen really on the language border? You know, how is this going on? And you were in Freiburg, which is about 60% French speaking and 40% German speaking. So usually, if you are really in a city which is on the language border, maybe you have the experience here between Slovak and Hungarian. You know, you have also bilingual cities. So usually, what happens? One speaks in his language, and the other one replies in his language. So if the housewife goes to the butcher and buys a nice piece of meat, she will order in French, and the butcher is replying in German. And in the beginning, you cannot imagine this. How does this really happen? But I think this is also your experience. It works quite well. And you are right. Just to finish this question of languages, you are right. If you want to do business in Zurich, which is in the German-speaking part, you better learn English than you learn French. It's also a political issue because the cantons, these entities are responsible for the schooling system, and some cantons have now decided the first foreign language should be French and not should be English, and not French. So it should not be a national language, but it should be the language which is more helpful for business. Actually, it's a question you discussed here in Slovakia as well. Can you choose the first foreign language, and some students opted for German, or is it compulsory English like the previous government decided? Okay, so this to the language question. And now the second part of participation, we have been discussing about it in the beginning. It's right, you know, you mentioned it, the participation or the interest is higher on the very small level. If you can vote, if a highway should pass in front of your house, or if you vote, you get atomic power station in 5 kilometers of distance, or if you can vote about finances, about tax, we vote also about the level of tax. This is more interesting than to vote on federal level about the agreement between Switzerland and the European Union, or about the tax agreement with Germany, which some people tried to bring to vote, and actually they couldn't collect the 50,000 signatures. So it seems, you know, the interest of Swiss people is not there. Your question was, how can you increase the participation? I'm not sure if it's really necessary to increase it, because non-participation can have two reasons. Either it's fatality, it's the feeling, and now we go to political culture, it's the feeling of people, we cannot change, we can't influence, we can't change anything anyway, so resignation. we better do other things about this political process. Anyway, they do what they want. This is one possible explanation for non-participation or for a very low participation. The other explanation can be people are satisfied. They are satisfied with the system, how it works. They are happy with the politicians they have. They think, well, things anyway, if I participate or not, it goes in the direction I want, so they do not participate. We had some, of course, it can be also a mix of both explanations. We evolved the system. In the 20 years ago, we had to go to the ballot box and drop the paper. We got for the, well, I explained you, we have about 4 times we can give our opinion 4 times per year, in average every 3 months, and we get the documentation at home before, by post, by mail. And then, 20 years ago, we had to go physically and drop the paper in the ballot box, 4 times per year. Usually, we went to church on Sunday morning, and then to the school facility, the school nearby the church, and there was the ballot box ready. We dropped the paper, and then we went home, and the mother had cooked a nice Sonntagsbraten, and we ate with the family. Now the style of life has changed a lot. You know, people don't go to church anymore. Mothers don't make Sonntagsbraten anymore, and we vote now by mail, by post. So we still get the documents at home. We fill in at home everything, and we can drop it in the next letterbox, which increased the participation, because you do not have to spend, or you don't have to go on Sunday anymore physically, but you can do it just at your desk. You fill in the papers and you drop them in the letterbox. By the way, we have to buy the stamp ourselves. It's not paid by the country, so the stamp to send our vote we have to pay ourselves. And now the next step to increase participation will be e-voting. So there is a whole system being developed so you can vote via internet, which is very demanding to find a system to make it totally safe. Of course, like e-banking or other sensitive businesses you do over internet, it has to be sure that only those entitled to vote have access to this e-voting. Some cantons have introduced this e-voting already, and it will come on federal level within the next 3 to 4 years. So we get the code and we can give our opinion by e-voting. Also for the participation of Swiss living abroad, we have about 700,000 Swiss, so almost 10% of the population living in Switzerland. They live outside of Switzerland, among them me. I'm also Swiss citizen, not living in Switzerland. And with this e-voting, this will make it more easy for Swiss not living in Switzerland to participate in the electoral and direct democracy participation.
Maybe just to add something, if it comes to the e-voting, the main discussion in Slovakia is not if, but when it will be. But the main problem, if it comes to Slovakia, is how to manage the problem with the buying of the voters. Because now it's quite easy. There are some systems how to manage it, especially in some villages in the eastern part of Slovakia. But if it comes to the e-voting, it will be even easier. So quite many people in Slovakia are afraid that this will happen, and some people in Slovakia will be paid because of the voting. I guess this is not a topic in Switzerland.
Money paying or financially buying votes, it's not so much a topic. We had a case of an African, I mentioned this as well, an African immigrant to Switzerland, and he was elected to the parliament. And then there was an investigation, and about 50 of the votes, which actually voted for, because you have to write the name in the parliamentary election, you have to write the name of the candidate by hand, or you can write it by hand. It's very complicated, I don't go into details. But they realized that 50 of the votes had the same handwriting. And actually it was his handwriting. So, you know, so it's a little bit strange. And they made investigation, and it was a big story in the newspaper, of course, especially because it was an African immigrant to Switzerland, which became Swiss citizen, of course. Otherwise he couldn't participate in the parliamentarian election. But as a typical African, you know, you come and cheat in the Swiss system, and his argument was that he went to Altersheimes, or retirement homes, and he helped these people to give their vote and explained, and then actually they asked him if he just could write, and then he wrote for them, he gave them a favor. So it goes a little bit in the same direction, you know. If you go to retirement homes where, of course, people can participate in the democratic process until they die, and elderly people, maybe they're happy for some assistance, and some candidates, they go particularly there and well, assist them more or less intensively in finding their opinion. Now this parliamentarian was brought to court. I think the good part of this story is that it became public. So there was a control, you know, so all the ballot papers were controlled, and some of this audit office said, well, but this is the same handwriting for 50 ballots, this is not normal, what's going on here. He was brought to court, but he was not committed, so he was freed. And I don't remember exactly the arguments, but from the system it shows, you know, you said it's no topic to buy votes in Switzerland, but it is actually. Okay. It is a risk which is always there, especially in small communities, you know, you depend on each other. I think the secrecy of voting is there, but you know, you discuss in the Stammtisch and do you this. So it is a risk, and well, we have to be aware of the risk and find ways, as you say now in Slovakia, that this debate is going on, we have to find ways to limit this risk to the maximum as much as possible.
Thank you. Some more questions, please.
Okay. I will have a question. If you think if it is possible to somehow import the system, the political system from Switzerland, maybe here in Slovakia, or you think if it is possible, and if you can imagine the way how it will work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is a very interesting question for the embassy, of course. I would say import the system, no, because the system has to come from within. It has to come from you. To compare the systems, to explain the Swiss system, as I do now here today, to share the experience in think tanks or in political circles, in universities, this absolutely yes. But everything that smells like import, you know, the Slovaks or Czechoslovaks didn't like the import of Soviet ideas from Moscow. The Swiss, they don't like import of ideas from the European court, because we want our own judges. So every country wants its own system, and actually it's a part of participation that the Slovak system has to be shaped or evolved in a way coming from within Slovakia. Every import is not acceptable, with a good argument. You know, if I'm Fico, a Slovak prime minister, I would say no, I do not want the import of another system from another country. But developing a new system with ideas or with examples from other countries, you are part of European Union, and European Union, in cooperation with Slovakia, has brought a lot of development to the country, a lot of new approaches and new ways to face challenges. And this is also possible between Switzerland and Slovakia. I'm most willing to have speeches like this today. I'm most willing to bring also experts to Slovak lawmakers or think tanks or wherever, to explain the Swiss system. but import is not the right expression. This would be unacceptable and with a good reason for Slovaks. I think direct democracy can work very well in Slovakia, but I think it should start on a small level. We explained with Karin a little bit the Swiss system, you know, to start on the very low level community and to build it up to the higher level of the district and of the country. I think the direct democracy has to start on this grassroots level and grow up to higher, well, let's say, to the country level. Interesting is also the comparison between Germany and Switzerland, two countries which are culturally very similar, but politically very different. Germany has no tradition of direct democracy, maybe also based on the historical experience. We spoke about the history. It's very important what kind of experience you make with your own system. And Germany had a bad experience in the 19th century, so they're more reluctant to direct democratical approach. But if you look at this train station in Stuttgart, which was such a huge political issue, and then it was brought to a referendum, it was brought to direct democracy, and I don't know if it was solved, or maybe Karin can tell us later more about it, if this was really a solution for this very, very hard debate in Stuttgart. So direct democracy, to summarize, cannot be imported, but you can refer to it and try to develop certain elements. Thank you. Yes, good.
I would like to ask you about criminality in Switzerland. As you said, the corruption is not the issue in Switzerland because of people's salary and the lifestyle that they can afford buying things, so they don't have to steal and this. And so I would like to ask you how it's with criminality in Switzerland, because we know that many of people in Switzerland carry guns. It's the law. Because I can't imagine that in Slovakia most of the people carry guns. So this is my question. And the second one is about the poverty. If there's some people who live in poverty in Switzerland.
Well, I start with this gun question. You know, it's like a brand of Switzerland that people carry guns. Actually, it's not totally correct. You know, you are not allowed to, or if you want to carry a gun in the street, you need a permission, like a policeman, or if you are in a club to shoot and you want to carry your gun around or your pistol, then you need also a permission. But what is still the law, that the army, the soldiers, we have a milice system, so basically all the men or most of the men do military service, and they take the gun with them at home. Now this is a very political debate, but because some crimes at home, they are committed with these guns, with the military guns. And there was one infamous incident 4 years ago that the soldier shot a girl just with a military gun just for pleasure. And then, this being direct democracy, there was an initiative collecting signatures which asked that all the military weapons have to be stored in the Kaserne, in the military camp. And this was really brought to a referendum, so we could vote if we want that the soldiers are still allowed to take the gun at home, or if after their military service they have to keep the gun in the military camp. And majority of the Swiss people said, no, we want that the soldiers are still allowed to take the gun at home. But you can explain only historically. For me it's a nonsense. You cannot justify this anymore of a military point of view, but it shows again how strong the history is. And the idea was that every Swiss is ready, having his gun at home. When an invasion happens, he can shoot his way from his home to defend his family and thinking like this. But it's a little bit, you know, it's not very serious thinking.
But isn't it connected with a criminality? Is a protection of the house too?
Yeah, but we are not United States, you know. In the United States it is very famous, you know, you are allowed to shoot the trespasser coming into your terrain. And this is not the case in Switzerland. Now coming back to your question of criminality, there is criminality in Switzerland, there is increasing criminality. Well, we have the usual means to fight, or the calls to politicians is more police, integrate the people. Schengen is a big topic. Switzerland is a part of Schengen, so the borders are open. A political issue is that some people want to cancel membership of Switzerland to Schengen because they say criminals can come more easily to Switzerland. So I spoke positive about Switzerland, but I do not have the statistical figures in my head. But I would say from the open criminality, not talking about corruption, but open criminality, Switzerland is not safer than Slovakia. I feel very safe if I walk around in Bratislava, and I think there is criminality because incomes, and this leads to your third question, poverty. Incomes have a very big difference between low incomes and high incomes. There is a lot of wealth in Switzerland, but there is also poverty, not below the poverty line in the sense that you don't have health care and you don't have enough food or no shelter. But the differences are huge, and this creates, of course, also criminality. So we do not live in, or Switzerland is not paradise. It's a country, a rich country, but struggling with practical questions as well.
Is there still no minimum wage in Switzerland? No, legally.
Now this is a very interesting question because we also vote about minimum wages. And there is no legal minimum wage in Switzerland. There is more or less, so there is no law telling this and this amount has to be the minimum wage. There is more or less an agreement that the minimum wage, and now please don't be shocked, should be 3,500 Swiss francs, which is 3,000 euro. So it's almost 10 times higher than in Slovakia. I think it's 329 or something like this. So, but I do not go now in the living costs also. You say for one person, if she has no children, only responsible for herself. If she wants to have a normal life, she needs 3,000 to 3,500 francs a month to survive, with housing and all the expenditures. So you see the costs are also very high. Now, your question is very interesting. There is a basic mistrust against the laws in Switzerland. So whenever possible, the economy tries to solve questions with the agreement. It's the consensus element. We have been discussing about it with Karin. So as long as the economy finds a consensus among themselves, then there is no legal intervention. And how it works with the minimum salary, we have Gesamtarbeitsverträge. I don't know how to say in English. It's an agreement between employers and employees for one branch, let's say Bauwirtschaft, construction. So there is an association of employers, association of unions, of employees, and they discuss together a minimum wage for the construction industry. And then there is the possibility to declare this agreement for one branch allgemeingültig, so applicable for the whole of Switzerland. So if you're a member of the union or if you're a member of the employers association, it doesn't matter, but all the construction companies have to respect this minimum wage.
There's a law on that?
It's not a law, but it's not a law, but it's an agreement between the social partners which has to be applied by all the companies. And, sorry? Okay, yeah.
Yes, but so even by the employers who are not member of those organizational unions, they do respect it.
They do respect it because it can be the association of employers has some like judicial power, so they could ask a fine by this company who is there are sanctions. They could ask a fine of the company who is not following this minimum wage.
Okay, maybe there will be a last question before I will give one question I'm keeping in my mind.
I would have one question related to the poverty. You mentioned these days neo-Nazis in Slovakia are relatively active and they are trying to move people against gypsies, and they even publicly claim that in Switzerland the government provides absolutely no support to gypsies. Is it true, or can you give some details about the relation between government and gypsies in Switzerland?
Now, that was declared in Slovak newspapers. It's not
newspapers, but
public debate.
It's also in the social networks that Switzerland is very strict against the poverty people, and it's an example for us how to manage and treat our Roma people. So is it really true or not?
It's very difficult to compare the situation, because there are no, let's say, permanent Roma settlements in Switzerland like there are in Slovakia. First of all, the percentage is much lower. There are a few, I would say a few hundred or a few thousand Romas living in Switzerland, and not according to statistics 5% or 10% like in Slovakia. So the demographic situation is very different. And in Switzerland the Romas do not live in permanent settlements, but they live like in vans, and they move around. So you don't have like these settlements I saw here also in east of Slovakia. They live in vans, and they have then places where they stay, and they get provided water and sewage, so they can connect their vans to these permanent facilities. But we talk about a few hundred of people, and so the situation is totally different. We had a program, and this is a shame of Switzerland. It was against human rights, but I also give you critical aspects of Switzerland, what we called in the 60s, 70s and 80s Kinder der Landstraße. So there is an organization, Pro Juventute, and they said, well, these gypsies moving around, they do not educate their children properly. So the children were taken away by force from the gypsy families and put to foster families. So legally, the government, in the name of the government, Pro Juventute, took the children away and put them into other families. And this was, of course, against human rights. Now, today you can read witnesses of these gypsy children, which are grown up or even 60, 70 years old, how hard this was and how they kept secretly in touch with their mothers and fathers, but officially, legally, they were taken away from their family. But this is a black spot in the history of Switzerland, which shows that the Swiss government was really very tough, but in a way tough, which is really in conflict with human rights. And there was a historical commission working up all this, let's say, history, which is not very favorable to the Swiss government, and apologizing and also giving financial compensation. But today, I must say, this gypsy issue is not a very big political issue in Switzerland or in France, even in France.
The social network discussion was not about the Swiss gypsies only, it was also about the Swiss immigrants, for instance, or Swiss people who are not able to be part of the society in the way the Swiss expect them to be. So it was also the question of the social benefits, because very many people in Slovakia now blame on the government that they are giving money without doing anything of the Roma problem. So that was the comparison in that.
Maybe we can link here a political debate about migrations or asylum seekers. They got very good financial support. And many asylum seekers came to Switzerland only to go through this process, which is going up to 4 years, to get the financial benefits. And this created some dissatisfaction within the Swiss population, because some of these asylum seekers got more money than those working on jobs with a low qualification. And now our parliament, and this is a very recent decision, cut down the financial benefits of asylum seekers to the minimum they need. So they get housing, and then I think they get 8 francs per day, some food. So this is a really, you cannot afford many things with this amount. So it is a debate in Switzerland. Maybe not for the Roma, but more concentrated on the asylum seekers, which can come to Switzerland and stay legally until the process is over.
Okay.
May I add? Well, this was sorry. Okay. Just very quickly, this was, in my opinion, a hoax, Facebook hoax, saying that unemployed people or people socially weak get no support in Switzerland, but I think if in Switzerland you're unemployed even for a long time, you get everything you need to survive and not be homeless, right? Is it right? Or because in Slovakia you get 2 euros per day, no housing, nothing.
Yeah.
And so,
well, for short-time unemployees, we have a special fund, and you get 80% of your previous salary for about 1.5 years. So this is very, very substantial. We have to contribute with our salaries. 1% of all the salaries we contribute in this unemployment fund. And after this you still get social benefits. So if here is said that in Switzerland you don't get anything, it's not true. Because it's also a balance with criminality we have been discussing before. If you don't give anything to the people, then the criminality would increase, because they find their ways to survive. So you still get enough funds if you're unemployed or if you're legally not entitled to work to survive in a correct way.
can you say, or do you know, how much is it after this 1.5 years? An unemployed person, even a person never working, never had been working, how much he or she gets? Or
It's hard to give you a figure, but it's about 2,500 francs when they have to pay the housing themselves. But
per family or per person?
per person. But the housing, you know, I have to tell you also, maybe a small apartment, you spend 1,500 francs, 1,200 euro in a remote area, you just spend for your 2-room apartment. So you must be very careful when you compare these figures. This would be a lot of money in Slovakia, but in Switzerland, if you just spend the necessary, then there's very little left.
Okay, if you don't mind, I will ask you maybe 2 more questions at the very end. I've been wondering, when the discussion has started, that you said that most of the politicians in Switzerland are not professional politicians. Does it mean that they are not having some salary if they are MPs, or how it works actually? Because people in Slovakia blame on our politicians that the main reason why they starting their political life is just to make money as much as possible. So how is it works in Switzerland?
So the Swiss system is like this on the federal level. I talk now about the federal level. The parliament has 4 sessions, and each session is 3 weeks. So 12 weeks there is a session. If you are in no committee, you can easily participate in these 12 weeks, or more or less easily, and have your maybe 80% job or 60% job in addition. They get paid well enough to, let's say, like about a half job salary. A parliamentarian gets money for the session, for the meeting, for transport, for everything. So I would say a parliamentarian job gets reimbursed for like a half-time job. So if he works 60% or 70% beside his parliamentarian mandate, then he can have a very comfortable life. Now it depends. This is the plenary session, 4 times 3 weeks in a year. You have also many committees and subcommittees preparing these sessions. And they are much more time-consuming, but they are reimbursed separately.
Okay.
So if you participate in many of these committees and subcommittees, then you can make your living out of being a parliamentarian, full-time parliamentarian.
So it's not 300% than the average salary of Slovakia as other Slovakian MPs.
Right.
And for assistants and so on and so on.
No,
It's just a reimbursement.
Deputy, it's just a reimbursement.
That's very different system, I have to say.
So I think this idea of the militia, that you're not a professional parliamentarian, this is still very strongly rooted in Switzerland.
Okay. One more question is that you mentioned that the weakest part of the direct democracy is that the minority of the people are really deciding. But I'm one of the few political scientists in Slovakia who picked up that actually in Slovakia 22% of the people decide that who will rule for next 4 years.
So it's in every system.
In every system it is the same. Does not matter if it's direct democracy or it's democracy within the MP system. So how could we maybe explain this to Slovak people? Is it really weakest point, or should we have an effort to build up the system of the direct democracy in Slovakia instead of this kind?
Of course, every democratic system wants to increase the participation of the people, be it by discussion or even at the poll. Now, direct democracy with these many possibilities of interfering can have the side effect that the participation in the poll decreases. Because they do not go to the election, they say, well, maybe the parliamentarian, I don't like him, but anyway, I can intervene later. I think Slovakia should continue to try to increase the participation, because like this discussion now, you're here, you listen to the debate, to share the experience and to think about political question is one part of participation which is extremely important. And if it reflects also on the polling station, even better. But I think it would be, well, unhealthy to change the system because of a weak participation. We have to work within the system and try to increase the participation. And now you being here shows you are interested, and NGOs are registering the debate and promoting it on the internet. So I think debates like this can help to make us all think about the system and to participate more actively. So I'm in favor of a big participation in the process.
One of the main priorities of our NGOs is to cancel this 50% necessity of people who are active, or how to say it correctly. You know, in Slovakia, if the referendum has to get the power, more than 50% of the people have to be part of this referendum. And this happened only once in our history, during the referendum to the European Union, entering of Slovakia to the European Union. So most of the people think that this is the main problem why direct democracy does not work in Slovakia. So most of the NGOs in Slovakia are in favor to cancel this 50% problem. And one of the main topic we speak about is this works in Switzerland without this 50%. And we believe that we have to promote it much more among the people, because this will help direct democracy to survive in Slovakia.
I totally agree. Well, as we discussed now in the last 1.5 hours, the idea of direct democracy is implemented very deeply in Switzerland. And this 50% or any other percentage of participation to change any law or question is non-existing in Switzerland. Nowhere we have this minimum participation or minimum level of vote, and this is, I agree, closely linked to the idea of direct democracy.
Okay.
Just to add, even more interesting than what you said, you have to collect 350,000 signatures for a nationwide petition.
50,000.
300 in Slovakia. It's 350,000 of 4 million eligible voters. To initiate a local referendum in Slovakia, like in city or town, you need to collect 30% of all the eligible voters' signatures.
Which is a lot.
It's almost impossible.
It's impossible.
So this is another reason why we compare Switzerland as a good example for Slovakia, how to manage it, because the only argument of those who are against is that financial issue. That's why we have 350,000 people who need to sign the petition. I don't believe this is correct. Thank you. If there is nothing to add, please let me thank very much to the Excellency. It was very interesting topic. It was very interesting discussion, I believe. And we all hope that this is not the last possibility to welcome you at our university, and not only at our university. So once again, also thanks to Karin Rogalska. She is the one who managed this discussion anyway. So we are very appreciated, and we will be very happy to welcome you once again, even next semester at this university. Thank you once again, and
thank you.
Hope to see you soon.
Yes, thank you.